Hello everybody, it's Peter. Peter with an I. Stewart. Chapter 1. A cool night breeze swept across the navy blue seawater that flowed through the islands, whose trees and rocks were blacker than the feathers of a crow. Carried on the wing of night, it passed over the cliffs and along the sagebrush, over the forests and pastures. The celestial mural of stars became clouded with the ambient light of street lamps. The breeze blew down the street and through the maze of houses. As it passed by a particular house, there was an awful crashing and tumbling noise from inside. Dawn came. Frank grimaced at the yellow haze that poured through the east windows. He made a mental note to tape cardboard over them to keep the stupid sun from bugging him in the morning. Mental notes are what each person pins up on their mind's refrigerator. Frank must have weak magnets in his head because all his mental notes fall off and get lost. The cheap plastic of Nancy's footies at the bottom of her Supertronic Heroes pajamas made a familiar scraping sound as she walked through the hallway and down the stairs. She walked by Joe, who was still asleep in a twisted, contorted mess at the base where he had been since his fall a few hours ago. "Wake up, Joe," said Frank as he passed him on his way to the breakfast table. Joe snorted as he woke. He turned himself right side up and let blood circulate back into his arm, which he'd been sleeping on for the past 3 hours. He felt as though he'd traded spines with the Elephant Man. "What happened?" asked Joe, still groggy, scratching his chest. "Did something happen?" asked Nancy as she passed over the industrial-sized box of cereal to Frank after pouring herself a bowl. Frank shrugged. "Well, yeah, I woke up at the bottom of the staircase," said Joe, shaking his arm, hoping the feeling would return. He wondered if maybe he'd killed it. "Oh, you fell down the stairs again," replied Frank. "I did?" answered Joe. "Yeah, you were sleepwalking," he recounted. Joe knew that there were autistic people out there that had more empathy than dear Frank, but this was a matter of potential compound fractures. Joe wondered how his comrades could be so blasé. "Did you hear me get up?" he asked. "I saw you when you got up to get a drink of water. You were heading right for the stairs," said Nancy, biding her attention between Joe and the comics section of Mr. Humphrey's newspaper. "Why didn't you stop me?" asked Joe, gaping at the injustice. "You're not supposed to wake up sleepwalkers. Everyone knows that," she said, sharing a chortle at Joe's naivete with Frank as he pulled the empty jug out of the fridge. "Is there ever any milk?" he exclaimed, putting the empty container back in the refrigerator and folding his arms in frustration. "I'm getting so sick of eating my cereal with water," he said with a hot lump in his throat, his voice warbling on the last word. Nancy put down the comic section. "I wonder why you're not supposed to wake up sleepwalkers," she asked. "I heard it could make you psychotic," said Frank, still almost ready to cry over not having any milk. "What?" scoffed Nancy in disbelief. "You can?" asked Joe, now plagued with concern that not only could he fall down the stairs and get a broken leg, but also be psychotic and want to fight everybody, at which point he would get beaten up. "Oh, sure you can," said Frank, quite positive. Joe knew him well enough to be sure he could easily see any sort of ruse Frank might try to play on him. Frank was quite sure, which was beginning to upset poor Joe. "No, you can't," said Nancy, who was beginning to wonder if maybe Frank was right. Frank was aghast to hear such plain truth questioned. "Yes, you can," he declared. He crossed one leg over the other and hunched forward to explain to Joe, whose angst was growing by the moment. "You see, when your body's asleep, your molecules are in a slightly different phase as when you're awake. When you're sleepwalking and somebody wakes you, your molecules have a really hard time switching over to the awake mode, and you could be stuck in the sleep mode forever, and your mind will always be halfway removed from reality." "What? No, you can't," repeated Nancy, absently playing with her cuticles as she gazed forth in thought, trying to find a logistical flaw in his reasoning. It was like her fingers knew the truth and were trying to sign to her, but it was useless because she didn't understand sign language. Too bad for her. Yes you can," said Frank, growing defensive. The scientist was talking about it on TV. Frank was too flustered to eat. "Well, I tell you, Nancy," he said, tossing his spoon into his cereal, "it's far too complex for somebody of your simple mental capacity to understand." Frank's statement was so ludicrous that Nancy nearly shot cereal out of her nose. She thought it was so funny. The irony that Frank would tell anyone else that they lacked mental capacity was simply hilarious. Joe was still unsettled. Through Nancy's laughter, Frank heard the phone ring. "You want to get that?" he asked. "What?" asked Joe. "The phone," he said. In the next episode, Frank is driven crazy by the ringing of that phone.